The fire's low, the desert's listening, and something out there has started repeating our words a half-beat late, as if it's learning our voices, one by one, before it comes closer to see which mouth they belong to. Every gust off the saguaro sounds like someone you trust stepping just out of sight, and the harder you stare into the dark, the more you'll swear they're waving you over. Phones die here, compasses spin, and names carry farther than they should, as if the rocks themselves are practicing how to say yours back. If you feel a breath at your ear and hear yourself whisper, "I'm right behind you," don't turn. It's only waiting for eye contact. Welcome to Verified Souls. Count how many voices you hear, then count again, because one of them will be yours. The guide warned us about echoes, like they were a living thing, but the laugh in the group made it feel like superstition dusted in tourist talk. A flourish to sell us the light beams and the narrow spine of Antelope Canyon under a perfect page sky. The truck dropped us at the slot's mouth, where the sand swallowed sound and the air cooled as if it had spent the day in a pocket of stone. And before we stepped in, he told us the Navajo name, Chebiganalini, the place where water runs through rock, and asked us not to touch the walls because our skin oils scar the sandstone forever. He had a radio clipped to his belt and a way of looking up at the sky between sentences, like he was listening for something else beneath us. And when a few of us lingered, he added quietly that the echoes here were not like other places, which drew out another laugh, but mine got stuck halfway up because those walls bent like ribs, and the light lay across the sand in soft bands, like a thing asleep. Inside, the canyon tapered, until the idea of going back felt like trying to reverse a breath. And the guide gave us a story as we walked, about a playful coyote who opened a door to another world, a legend folded into the tour so easily it felt like a warning disguised as something charming. The floor was soft, slopes worn smooth by flood and foot, and the place held quiet the way a shell holds the ocean, every step returning as something thinner, not quite our sound anymore. I kept my hands by my sides because he'd asked, because the walls looked like resting animals, and because the way the canyon turned meant you didn't see where you were going until you were right on it. And there was a strange relief in not knowing, a surrender that felt like respect. He pointed out a beam carving through dust motes in the upper chamber, told us the old stories said sunlight here could cleanse a person's spirit, and a woman beside me whispered "Amen," like muscle memory. And the guide looked up again, eye flicked to the sky, and the radio hissed in a burst, a little spit of static that made him turn his head. We took photos, of course. People held their phones flat and vertical and angled, and the hush filled with the rustle of nylon straps and the soft declarations of beauty that tourists carry like prayers. And at the back of the group, a kid whistled, 2 short notes bouncing off the curve like birds. The whistle came back, almost the same, and the kid grinned at his brother, tried 3 notes, and the return lagged, as if trying to catch the shape mid-flight. It was cute until it wasn't, until the guide's hand went up and his eyes went narrow and he said no. Not loud, not harsh, but final. And the kid flushed the color of his water bottle and put the cap back on, like he'd done something worse than noise. I wanted to say something to the kid because it seemed unfair, because a canyon is a place you speak to, but the guide had that radio ear again, that tilt that isn't performance, and a thread in the air pulled tight. Someone asked about floods, and the guide's gaze moved past us to the ledges, where driftwood had lodged like bones. And he reminded us that this place learned water by death, that 11 people had been taken when a storm 7 miles away sent a black tongue through the slot, a day when ladders tore from the rock and the canyon remembered its first language. A silence followed that felt like a confession, all of us staring up to the rectangle of blue and weighing the fragility of an afternoon against the speed of weather. Then the radio broke in, a artless stutter that sounded briefly like a word, and the guide pressed a finger to the mic, then let it fall. We moved on past a pinch that made the big guy in the Eagles cap exhale, in a way that became a laugh, and somewhere behind us a voice said, "Right here." Quiet enough to be a shared hallucination, and 4 of us turned, including me, expecting the guide, but he was ahead. The sound landed like breath on the back of my neck, familiar, a tone I'd heard every day of my life. Mine, I thought, but my mouth was closed. I told myself it was someone playing, someone doing that thing where you repeat the last thing someone said a half-beat late, and it would turn into a joke when we found the culprit at the back with a grin and that should-have-known-better shrug. The guide kept us moving, pointed to a place where the wall folded like a curtain, and said light made this chamber a chapel at noon, and he was right. The pale column turned the dust into 1,000 glittering flies, and everyone stepped into it one by one, the way people step into sun at weddings or baptisms, and even the camera talk fell quiet. The radio stayed sullen, a sleeping animal on his hip, and the canyon changed grain, crossbeds tilting, so the floor pitched and my calves got that tremble you get on ladders. A quick flash of the lower canyon's metal stairs in my head from a brochure, the warning about knees and fear of heights, all the practical facts that tether you to the ordinary. We turned again, and there was the sound of my mother saying my name, not the sweet way, but the warning way. Short, stern, the syllable that meant stop. And I snapped around with the reflex of old command. But of course, she wasn't there. The guide said something in Navajo then, a phrase that sounded like a greeting turned inward, and for the first time he touched the wall, palm flat, apology in the gesture, and I felt like we'd just passed a line I hadn't known was there. The kid with the whistle stumbled, and his brother grabbed his elbow, and from somewhere near the rear, the low man's voice said, "This way." Only it wasn't the low man, because he was puffing at the front, and the guide barked, "Stay with me," sharp enough to cut through the canyon sleep. A woman began to step toward the sound and froze when it turned into her own voice, calling, "I'm here," so exact the hair rose on my arms. That particular hush laugh you make to calm people who can't see you yet. The guide worked a fast count under his breath, eyes doing attendance, and then he started to tell us the coyote story again, but different. How sometimes a door opens not for us to pass through, but for something to take a look. And if you speak into it, it speaks back, wearing your clothes. Cameras made their small insect noises, and someone's flash popped against the ban on flashes. And the guide didn't correct them because the radio had begun to speak. Static. Then the shape of a word, and I felt the spell we had all agreed to when we stepped under the rock begin to fray. The sound of a tour behind us seeped forward. Words in another language, laughter rising and falling like a tide catching the same cliff, and the canyon took it and made a chimera. Different syllables braided into something that moved like intention. The kid's 3-note whistle came again beside my left ear, even though the kid was ahead. His head tipped back to catch the light, and the whistle returned a fraction late, wrong by a breath, but trying. Yes, trying. And then perfect. The guide's voice changed. He told us we were going to wait a moment in the wider chamber. Let another group pass, but his eyes went to the narrow slot behind, measuring it like a firefighter measures smoke. He asked us not to say our names anymore, not to call to each other, and a woman scoffed until the canyon said her husband's nickname in a voice dusted with old cigarettes, a voice that hadn't been used in years because he'd quit, and the man's face folded in on itself like clay. The radio coughed, and the guide barked a sequence of numbers. Another voice answered, distant, unreadable. Then the guide said, "We were moving now," and a current ran through the group like electricity. Heads down, hands off, single file. The big man brushed the wall and flinched, apologized to Stone, and I followed the small prints in the sand that told the story of the group ahead of us. The straight line of a cautious walker. The drag of a heel where someone lost balance. The dusty ghost of what our bodies were doing, whether we named it or not. The canyon spoke my name again. Not my mother's way, this time, but my own voice from a voicemail in 2019, the one I left for a friend the night his father died. Everything about it precise, down to the soft mistake on the second word, and I felt heat under my ribs as if hands had pressed there. I wanted to answer, to say, I hear you, I'm here, the script I know by habit, but the guide's warning about names had become a physical thing, a barrier like glass, and I kept my teeth together the way you do at the dentist when they tell you not to swallow. The canyon took someone's breath and returned it as a child crying, quick and high and brief, and the woman who had scoffed before started to murmur a prayer, hadn't used in 2 decades, switching languages mid-sentence. And the canyon tried that too, returned the same prayer, braided wrong. You could feel the group unraveling around the edges, people leaning toward the sounds that knew them best, and the narrowness of the path meant that if one of us stepped out to meet a voice, there would be nowhere for the next person to go, and the knowledge of that made my palms sweat under the desert cool. The guide kept talking. He talked about the shape of stone, the age of it, about respect as an action, not a feeling, and wove into it a story about a girl who'd gotten lost here once and come out guided by something that wanted her safe, which sounded like a carve on the same tree as the coyote, but it steadied us, gave us a third thing to throw our eyes at. Stone, guide, story. We hit a chamber where the light made a pale pool, a chapel, yes, and it felt like a neutral ground, and the sound softened, as if they'd reached a frontier where the canyon's memory didn't extend as well. And I took a breath. I hadn't known I'd been rationing. A gust ran through like a hand, carrying the smell of wet dust, though the sky outside had been hard blue, and every body in the group turned their faces up, the mammal in us sniffing weather, and the guide's radio burst into a clipped tone that made him start talking in a speed I hadn't heard, the professional speed that belongs in a different story. He said we were moving now, that we couldn't wait, and I thought of the 1997 flood, of ladders and sudden water, and the way distance lies to you in a desert, and the group became a single animal, all motion, without chatter. The canyon tightened and loosened in pulses, and I felt like I was inside a throat, a thought I could not keep. And from behind us my name came again, my father's voice this time, from a tape of me as a toddler, the way he'd say it, drawing the vowel long, joy like a light in it. And I almost broke. I did. I almost turned, almost said Dad. And if I had, I think something would have stepped into that word and taken it from me. We emerged the way sleep loosens, slow at first, then all at once, and the sun hit with that stark page heat, dry and absolute, and the parking lot looked impossibly ordinary, lines of trucks and the skeletal shade structures, the unromantic sprawl of equipment that keeps sacred places from becoming tragedies, and I understood some small piece of the guide's face. The radio emitted a final insect hiss and went mute. The guide counted us again, then again, and when he hit the last number, he looked relieved and then blank, professional, and nodded like a man whose prayer had been heard. People found their cars, and sand leaked from their shoes, and the kids started to whistle, unconsciously, a different shape this time, and when the return came, it came from the parking lot shade, a late echo from the mouth of the slot, a fractured, failing thing, still trying. To learn, on the drive back to town, I said nothing because the words felt fragile, and I wasn't sure which of them were still mine. And when my phone came back to life, bars climbed like a ladder bolted into the day, and the first voicemail that arrived was old, years old, the one I had left for my friend in 2019, time-stamped that night. A glitch, maybe, or a system hiccup. But the sound of my own voice made me pull to the side of the road and listen to the person who had said those things with such certainty. That night, in the motel, the air conditioner thumped with a rhythm like a heartbeat under drywall, and I could not stop hearing all the ways the canyon had said my name, how it had tried on my voices, like clothes from a closet, where everything fits because it's all yours. I thought of the guide putting his palm to the wall, apology or pact, and wondered how many times he had taken people in and brought them out, and how many times he had not, and I wondered what the canyon collects, skin oils, yes, and breath, and maybe small pieces of our echoes. A vocabulary it grows until it says us back so well we forget who started the conversation. The legend of the coyote isn't a warning to keep children close, not exactly. It's a reminder that a playful door is still a door, and some thresholds don't care whether you cross them with a laugh or a prayer. When I finally slept, I dreamt the canyon answered the last question anyone ever asks in a place like that. Are you there? And the answer came in my voice from every direction, perfect and late by a breath, saying, yes, right here, until I woke with my heart going like floodwater. And for a moment, I believed the echo had followed me out. We called it the crossing because it wasn't on any map with a name, just a strip of hardpan hammered flat by tires and wind where the desert met the border fence in a dead straight line. And if you drove far enough past Yuma, the night took on a taste like aluminum and old batteries. It was supposed to be a stupid adventure for a Friday. College kids with a generator, a trunk full of black lights, a playlist that made the speakers rattle, and paint that turned your face into a galaxy. The ground out there breathes when the heat lets go, an exhale that smells of creosote and salt, and when the generator shuddered to life, it stitched a purple-blue world out of nothing, the fence post becoming ribs, and the dirt glowing with a metallic sheen wherever somebody had spilled the fluorescent paint. We laughed at how the desert transformed under cheap light, how the sand crawled with color like static. And Grady told us we were dancing on an ancient sea, as if that made our thrift store rave profound. I didn't correct him. He was half right. The thing under us loved the current even more than we did. It started when Sid's bottle rolled and came back trailing dust that pulsed under the blacklight, a faint heartbeat in the grains, like something alive agreeing with the bass. She crouched and pressed her palm to it and jerked back, not because it burned, but because the sand vibrated in a rhythm slightly off from the music, like a drunk drummer catching up. The generator coughed. Everyone groaned. The beat stuttered, then recovered. A layer of fog made from our own breath hung in the cold patch where the light pooled, and somebody let out that high, ugly laugh people make when they're about to ask if anyone brought anything stronger. No one did. We didn't need it. The glow paint drew continental drift on our skin, lines of neon vertebrae, constellations we'd named for private jokes. And when we moved, the ground twitched in sympathy. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself it was a trick of light. Every explanation felt sane and thin. By midnight, the fence threw a long, perfect shadow, and beyond it the desert turned into nothing. No dry grass, no scrub, just a black expanse that swallowed sky. Grady wanted a photo with the line in it, his body split between purple and darkness, like a poster for a band that never existed. So he walked out where the paint had fallen thickest and lay down. The ground dented around him as if the sand had muscles, and his outline held for a second after he stood, shimmering like heat. The rest of us whooped, 'cause that's what you do when the universe does a cheap trick and you're young. You applaud it. When I bent to touch that shimmering outline, the grains hummed beneath my fingers, a mosquito buzz that ran up the bones and settled in the teeth. Sid said, "Feel that?" And I nodded, and she said, "It likes the power," and laughed. Grady switched playlists to something with a meaner kick, and the violet fog seemed to thicken. The generator settled into a smooth purr like a cat. The first wrong thing was small. The black light made everyone's eyes turn demon bright, pupils swallowed up by a wash of color, and in that chemical twilight, Sid's lips had a ring of paint that never quite dried. She took a swig from her bottle. The paint smeared, and for a second the smear crawled upward against gravity, a snail trail reversing itself. I must have frowned because she smacked my shoulder and stuck out her tongue, a screaming neon red I knew was impossible with the paint we bought. I told myself it was the light exaggerating everything. I told myself I hadn't seen the smear climb. I looked down at my own hands, and the lines I'd drawn were no longer where I put them. They had drifted a fraction like stickers in heat, edges softening, migrating toward the veins. The second wrong thing had a voice. Grady raised his phone to capture the fence and us, and he said, 1, 2. And a third voice, not his, not mine, said, 3, from the ground. It wasn't quite sound. It was vibration shaped like a word in my bones. The generator faltered again. The black light flickered. In the dark beat between blinks, the desert turned back into its true self, cold, empty, enormous, and something pulsed beneath us, not in the earth in general, but in the specific place where our spilled paint had seeped. The lights came back, and the glow had spread, a thin film reaching for our shoes, following the treads like ivy, a river delta drawn upside down to meet our ankles. The humor drained from Grady's posture so fast it looked like a trick. He lowered the phone, and the thing in the ground lowered its own gaze like a child mimicking an adult. We should have left right then. Every instinct I owned leaned toward the truck so hard my hips hurt. But fear is a lazy negotiator, and the light made a promise that felt harmless. Just one more song, one more minute. The story will be better if you stay. Sid moved to the generator to check the fuel, and the black light made the rot in the gas can look galaxy pretty. She unscrewed the cap, and the hum beneath our feet deepened like a throat clearing. I stepped into the paint by accident, a barefoot mistake, and the sensation was not like wetness or grit. It was like pressing my foot to the back of a TV, heat and a barely perceptible buzz. The paint crawled between my toes, and a thread of color lifted itself onto my skin and wrote a short curve that matched the rhythm of my pulse. I yanked back, and it left a filigree of neon on the sole of my foot like a signature. It began to copy us in earnest. Where Sid's breath hung, the fog took on a shape, and exhaled again with a delay so small it might as well have been intent. Where Grady clapped to test the echo, the air answered in a ragged snap, and then, on the fourth try, got it right. The ground's glow gathered into the impression of fingers when we stooped, mimicked our hands, our shoes, our lazy spins, a beat behind. It was playful the way lightning can be playful. Sid, high on everything except drugs, leaned over the paint and said, "Hey," and the hum answered with a note that matched the pitch of her voice, and then climbed half-step higher like a question. She laughed until it laughed back, and then the sound stayed in her throat and didn't come out. We didn't have a word for it, so we made a bad one. Grady called it the bloom, the way the glow swelled and thinned in time with us, but bloom is for flowers, and this was a bloom of algae in a lake that had been dead for 100 years and suddenly woke up with teeth. It learned fast. The paint on our arms slid subtly until our drawn constellations became more accurate versions of themselves, lines correcting away from jokes and toward anatomy. I watched a neon rib stretch down my forearm, then notch itself in 3 places the exact distance apart as my own bones. Grady slapped my arm and said, "Dude," too loudly, and his echo came from the dirt near the fence and didn't end when his mouth did. It kept going. A faint, sustained tone. He stepped back. The glow followed him, still a beat behind. The generator's purr deepened again, an animal satisfied. We tried off. Off is supposed to be safe. Grady took the black light off the tripod and unplugged it, and the desert, free of violet, should have been simple moon and stars, but the glow remained a bruise-colored afterimage in the dirt, clinging to contours like lichen. Without the hum of the fixture, the vibration in the ground was obvious and wrong, a purr with edges. Sid whispered my name without moving her lips, then said it out loud, and the ground murmured it almost perfectly an instant later. A trick of acoustics, I thought, because the alternative was too stupid to bear. But acoustics don't make your drawn lines migrate toward your veins. Acoustics don't make the glow crawl up your ankle in a slow ribbon, coiling like a necklace you didn't put on. We stumbled toward the truck with that party's over laughter you used to keep a shape around panic, and the bloom followed like water follows a shore. At the tailgate, Grady fumbled keys and dropped them, and when he bent, the glow rose with him like a cape, clinging to his back, and he swore, then stopped swearing, because the words stuck to his tongue, the neon on his lips drawing itself into the shape of the syllables and refusing them passage. He clawed at his mouth and left streaks. The black light on the ground flickered even unplugged, a dying firefly. Sid screamed without sound, jaw wide, paint on her throat bright as a wound. I reached for her, and the glow leapt to my wrist, slick as oil and warm as breath, and climbed against gravity toward the soft where pulse lives. I felt it hesitate, like a dog listening at a door. The fence saved us. That sounds like a moral. It wasn't. Grady, in blind instinct, grabbed the top rail, and the bloom surged for him, a living tide, and hit metal. The rail took the charge meant for flesh and sang, a thin, reedy whine, like a tuning fork dropped down a well. The glow recoiled so fast the air snapped. We moved as a unit then, slapping our arms, scraping paint with the edges of license plates, smearing it on the fence, until our skin looked raw and human again. Where the glow fell on the rail, it fizzed and withdrew, leaving a smear that darkened and went inert, the way a jellyfish turns to string in your hand once it's dead. We painted the fence with our own danger, an improvised exorcism in stripes. It didn't like losing. That's the only way to describe the thing beneath the dirt turning petulant. The ground's hum went low and slow, not a purr now, but a growl. The lines it had learned, the signatures it had stolen, the voice prints and breath patterns, all quivered in the sand and began to converge toward the strip of hardpan we'd turned into a dance floor. The glow gathered itself, like a creature making a decision. The generator died, for real this time, with a backfire and a sigh. And in the sudden, enormous quiet, the desert's pulse was everything. It pressed up to the edge of the fence and stopped. Not from respect, but because the metal was wrong for it. And in that pause, we got the truck started. We left tire tracks like escape routes, and the bloom rolled after them until the black light on the ground, far behind us now, flickered one last time and went dark. In the rear view, the glowing smear collapsed in on itself, jittered, and lay still. Sid regained her voice in a gasp that sounded borrowed. Grady drove with his hands locked wide on the wheel and didn't look at us until headlights hit the first respectable sign of civilization. When we pulled into a gas station near Fortuna Foothills, the fluorescent checkout light inside looked like a blessing. The paint on our skin, scrubbed to angry pink, still held ghosts of the lines the thing had moved. My wrist retained a faint ring like a healed burn in the shape of a bracelet I'd never owned. We swore to keep it stupid. We made it a group lie. The generator choked. The wind did weird things. The paint was cheap. But silence is a terrible lid for pressure. I started hearing the ground in places it shouldn't be. The low hum through the soles in the laundry room. A mosquito whine in the campus crosswalk when a car idled and the light washed everything pale. In the shower, warm water collected faintly at my ankles, and for a second my skin remembered the upward crawl. It passed. It always passed. Until one night I reached to turn off my desk lamp, and the bulb hummed 2 notes higher than it should. A thin mimicry. I unplugged it, and it hummed anyway for a beat, as if reluctant to let me go. A week later, a sandstorm rolled through Yuma like a wall, and the power grid hiccuped. A photo made the rounds the next day, grainy and stupid, taken by a guy who had no idea he was standing near where we danced. In the dust film, the ground looked etched with faint light, a rib cage drawn wrong under a thin skin. Someone in the comments said, "Glow party," and laughed. I turned my phone face down, but the image stayed in the dark behind my eyes. I thought about electricity and hunger. I thought about how quickly a thing can learn a rhythm when you hand it a beat and a light. No one believes this unless they were there. It reads like rumor, like urban legend with vibes, and a moral about not littering. Maybe that's fine. Maybe that keeps it safe. But if you ever take a black light into a place the map did not bless with a name, and the ground starts to answer back in any language, don't teach it yours. Don't draw your veins for it in pretty colors, And if it learns anyway, if it hums the notes you love, give it metal and distance, and leave before it asks for your voice with the confidence of a friend. The first call that afternoon was a woman whispering that the streetlights had come on at 2:13, and by the time dispatch asked her to repeat her address, she was sobbing that the sky looked wrong, like glass turned black on the other side. The board lit up one bulb at a time: Brewery Gulch, Tombstone Canyon, up Mule Pass, and every voice asked the same question without saying it. Did anyone else see it? Lightning can drop a neighborhood. A transformer can pop and make a few blocks forget how to hum. But this was the sun. The clock over the radio said 2:14 p.m., and the daylight fell out of Bisbee as if a hand had closed over the town. People talk about small towns like they're fragile in a storm, but the first minutes were polite. You could hear it in the voices, the way callers apologized for calling 911 because it might be nothing. Might be a Tucson thing, or a thunderhead sitting wrong. Then the apology turned into inventory. The woman at the Copper Queen said the lobby went from afternoon gold to midnight without a dimmer, and the guests stood up at once, a choreography of unease. A man on Brewery Gulch said the neon beer signs were the only stars left, and someone had tried his truck, and the headlights died new. The deputy on patrol rolled to a stop, and his dash cam showed the black creeping down Brewery like an ocean advancing, swallowing colors in order: red first, then blue, then the plastic greens of tourist shirts, then the whites of eyes. Someone in Warren said their air conditioner bucked against the dark like a horse. Someone else laughed like they were on a ride and paying for it. If there was a storm, it had put away its sound and only brought night. The line lit, with a boy who said his mother had told him never to call 911 unless she was bleeding. But she was sitting at the kitchen table, whispering to someone who wasn't there, and he wanted to know if the dark outside their window was supposed to move like that. The cameras downtown showed pedestrians clustering under awnings for no reason, except their nerves needed a roof. The gold-lettered windows reflected black. On the feed from the intersection by the Big B on the mountain, the letter disappeared, swallowed by what looked like smoke without a source. The operator in the next chair made the broadcast we never make. Citywide, immediate, stay inside, lights on, conserve battery, don't open doors to anyone you cannot name. It came out like a bedtime story read too fast. The first scream we heard wasn't on the line. It came through the open side door of dispatch, echoing up from the street like a wire snapped taut. It wasn't panic. It was warning, thin and clean. The lights in the room held because they were on a different circuit, someone joked, because we all needed the joke. The generator out back coughed and caught, the way it does at the end of summers when the grid gets tired. On Channel 2, the sergeant's voice was calm and wooden. Check on the mine. Tour. Check the schools. Check anyone who cannot check themselves. On Channel 3, someone said the word eclipse, and someone else said that's not how eclipses work, and in the middle of that, all the channels went to a whisper with a texture like graphite rubbed on paper. You learn to separate noise from message. Static is wind. Static is distance. This was a kind of language with a fever, a low rush that had syllables in it nobody could grab. The recorded calls began to play themselves backward in the software, a glitch we'd seen once during a lightning strike. And over the speakers, the woman from the Copper Queen unspoke her fear, her voice uncracked, a reassurance rolling out of her throat like film rewound. The boy's voice returned to silence, word by word, and behind it a whisper. Not his mother, not anyone we knew. The lights in dispatch didn't flicker, but the room felt smaller, like the night had learned we were there and pressed its face to the glass. Traffic slowed to the pitch of old film. Cars resisted the dark like animals resisting a flood. The dash cam from the cruiser at the mine recorded street lamps doing something illegal. Their halos narrowed and lifted, not like light, but like eyes learning to focus. The deputy said his own flashlight beam hit the air and stopped, not for lack of power, but because there was no place to go. He tried the horn, and it sounded like it was happening 3 rooms away. He called out, "Hey," just to prove a man's voice works, and another "hey" came back from the dark on the wrong breath. Not echo, not delay, but an answer with a temperature. He did not speak again. Bisbee is a cave turned inside out. There are seams under our houses. The old maps show, like veins, 2,000 miles of them if you believe the brochures. And when the dark took the town, it found those veins, and ran them cold, found the old air, and taught it to stand still. In the cameras that still wanted to work, you could see the pockets where darkness went first. Mouths to tunnels, alley mouths, the open mouths of doorways. Night likes mouths. The emergencies that came in stopped being questions about what, and turned into where and who. A woman on Opera Drive said a black dog sat in her yard and watched her through the glass, and then the dog became 2 dogs, and then 5. And when she blinked, the 5 dogs were one tall thing like 2 men standing too close. And when she blinked again, the yard was empty. A man in a basement apartment said he could hear his upstairs neighbor walking even though she was in Tucson. And every time he said her name quietly to calm himself, the walking stopped for half a second and then doubled. Someone said, "Stay on the line," to a caller who had no name to give. The connection hissed like hair in a fire. The monitors washed themselves in velvet and then cleared. On one, at the top of Brewery, the dark moved wrong, a slick widening, and 3 figures stood shoulder to shoulder under a street lamp and had a conversation so normal our eyes hurt, and then their shadows detached and walked away without them. The 3 bodies did not notice they had been left. The lamp above them went thin, lifting its light like a skirt, embarrassed to see. The shadows rejoined them at the next pool of light, as if nothing had happened. If you do this job for more than a year, you discover which part of your mind gets to watch which kinds of things. The part that watches people die is not the part that watches shadows lie. Then the hospital said the generator hiccuped, and the monitors blinked, and everyone took a breath at the same time because we all have that one fear that turns the world off. The nurses at the ER said the power returned, but the room stayed dim, like a sunset sneaked in and sat in the corners, and someone in triage laughed too loudly and then apologized to the night. They told us a patient's pulse slowed in the dark and quickened when a nurse said his name, as if the air had to remember who he was before light could. The word for that is placebo until it isn't. By 3, the black was total and soft. No star, no mountain, no sky. Someone yelled that the bee was gone. Someone else said, maybe that's okay. The voices on the board had changed from questions to arrangements. Can you check on my dad? Can you tell my kids to come home? Can you... And now and then a voice that sounded like a child would breathe and say nothing for a full minute and hang up. An operator in training whispered that it felt like an ocean had come to visit without water. The sergeant said in the tone you use when you want people not to panic that we had reports of unusual conditions, and we were doing what we always do, which is count, keep track, send help, say names, make promises. The promises stuck to our teeth like candy. At 3:11, the darkness thinned by the width of a hair. It wasn't light exactly, but rather the absence of the pressure that had made your heart beat like it was in a smaller chest. The cameras regained their nerve. The letter B blinked back on the mountain as if someone had finally remembered the switch. The first person who said, "It's over," did so in a coffee shop voice. Conversational relief. It wasn't over, but it was changing into a story we could tell ourselves without breaking. The street lamps lowered their halos like hats. The shadows returned to their jobs. The cars that had stalled made noises like waking animals, and people cheered from porches in a polite, exhausted way. The deputy at the mine came back on Channel 2 and said, "Sorry," like he'd been on break. We took stock. We counted the calls like beads. We marked the names that would need checking after. We listened to the recorded afternoon again and heard small things our ears had missed when the fear was newer, the way some words had doubled, the strange lag in the boy's laugh, the way the wind had not made a single sound. We counted the people who didn't call. In a town like this, you know who should have. The old miner who sits on the bench outside the hotel in a hat that belonged to his father did not call. The woman on opera did not call again. The man in the basement called to say his upstairs neighbor had stopped walking, and we told him she wasn't home, and he said he knew. He knew. That was why it was better. By sunset, the real one, tourists were already joking about the blackout as if it had been a prank by the town, some theatrical stunt for the ghost tours. The guides obliged because that's their job, to make a performance out of old trouble. The news called it a power anomaly. The explanation with wires and wind will arrive eventually. It always does. The hospital signed off with numbers that made everyone seem safe. The miner on the bench took his hat off and put it on again and did not get up. The woman on opera's porch light burned steady all night. A private lighthouse. In dispatch, when the board finally went amber and then gray and the hum returned like a refrigerator in summer, we all sat and listened to the recording that didn't belong to any caller. It was 2 minutes long, and it had no origin, and it sounded like the town did when all the lights were out. Not silence, but breath. In it, for a span small as a blink, you could hear the river that doesn't exist here, and the gull that would never fly over these hills, and the crowd on a metal bleacher in a place that isn't ours. It was other afternoons layered on top of ours, as if the dark had scraped off a little from everywhere it had ever been, and left it on our tape. Someone said cosmic, and someone else said nonsense, and we labeled the file with the date and put it in the drawer that has no label. When people asked later what it felt like, we lied. We said it was an outage, and that happens. We said it got spooky, but it was fine. We said we stayed calm because that's the job. The truth is, it felt like being looked at by a very old animal that did not care about you enough to hurt you, only to press its face to the glass and fog it, and see if your breath matched its breath. The truth is that when the sun came back, the town cheered, and then, in the same breath, pretended it never left. The truth is, there are still houses that keep their porch lights on all day now, not because they believe in light, but because they want the night to know they're not asleep. They warned me on day one that the petrified forest keeps two kinds of logs, the ones you can see and the ones it keeps of you. The first are easy. Late Triassic trees turned to quartz and iron and rainbow stone, trunks lying where floods dumped them 225 million years ago. Their insides replaced grain for grain until wood became mineral and time forgot the difference. The second kind are quieter. Incident reports, ranger notes, small letters in a binder that say, people take what isn't theirs, mail it back when their luck goes sour, and apologize to a desert that doesn't answer mail. My job was simple. Patrol the long logs and crystal forest trails, keep hands off the souvenirs, answer questions about how a forest can be horizontal, and, if anyone asked, explain that the curse is a story we tell to keep the fossils where they belong, the way parents tell kids about fences that bite. It was late season, the sky an empty blue plate, the painted desert beyond the park striped with the old Chinley colors, and the wind had the dry sweetness of a place that used to be all water. I kept my notebook because a senior ranger named Marta said, "Write it down when the weird stuff happens, or someone else will write it for you, and you won't like their version." The morning was ordinary enough. A couple from Flagstaff asking if the logs had ever stood upright. No, they were buried, fossilized, and later exposed by erosion. The forest, a river of downed giants turned to stone. A man with a dog in his truck cab who wanted to know if Agate Bridge had fallen yet. Not yet, thanks to an ill-advised concrete support from 1917 we pretend is charming. A teenager dragging her feet and asking if dinosaurs ever walked here, and me pointing at a low hill and telling her about phytosaurs and amphibians bigger than imagination, and the way the ash from volcanoes to the west made crystal out of wood, while everything else rotted. The park hums with that kind of nostalgia, the clean museum vibe of deep time. It doesn't prepare you for the kind of wrong that fits in your hand. At noon, a man named Leonard came into the station with a piece of petrified wood in his palm and guilt on his face like heat rash. He said he'd picked it up just to feel the weight, as if weight belonged to him to study. And then he walked to the gift shop, changed his mind, walked back out to put it where he found it, and couldn't find the spot. And by the time he returned to the trail, he'd walked a mile with it in his hand and felt dumb enough to come confess. He set the piece on the counter with the tenderness of someone putting down a live animal. I could see the colors in it: iron reds, manganese purples, the translucent chandelier, bits of silica that catch the sun and make tourists gasp. And I did what we do: wrote the note, asked where, told him we'd return it within a day, and gave him a pamphlet that says, "Please don't." He nodded like a man coming out of anesthesia. He said, "It tapped," and then recomposed his face into a reasonable person's face and said, "Never mind." By 2, the wind had gone flat. In this park, you learn to read wind like surf. When it drops out, sound carries wrong. I walked the spur between giant logs and the old roadbed of Route 66, where they kept a useless rusted car as a prop, proof that deep time intersects kitsch with no apology. I put Leonard's piece in my day pack to take back to Long Logs and whispered the usual joke. See, no curse, easy fix. And felt the stone faintly knock my spine, once, fast as a hiccup. I stopped the way you stop when you think a wasp has flown into your shirt. I took the pack off and set it on the ground and listened to the thud of my own pulse. The desert does this to you. It makes your body loud. I unzipped the pack. The wood looked like wood looks. I told myself heat can do funny things to zippers and nerves. I zipped it and lifted the pack, and the stone tapped again, twice, as if answering a question I hadn't asked. Any ranger will tell you the conscience letters are theater with practical outcomes. Teach people not to steal, return what's been taken, let guilt do the labor the law can't. We don't talk about the other letters, the ones folded into the binder's back and misfiled as interpretive, where people write that the log they took sounded like a heartbeat in their house at night, or that the piece on their mantle migrated small distances when no one watched, or that their toddler began stacking shiny things around it in the shape of rings without knowing why. Those are stories, not reports. You can't act on a story. You can only choose whether to be the kind of person who believes it long enough to behave. I took the long way to Long Logs, across the crust where footprints leave a faint punctuation that lasts until wind decides the page needs turning. The stone knocked the pack again at odd intervals, never rhythmic enough to be a machine, in the shade of the sign that explains permineralization, how groundwater brings silica into the cells and replaces lignin with quartz until wood is memory and mineral. I took the piece out and held it against my wrist. It was warm. Not sun warm, palm warm, body warm. I felt ridiculous and fascinated in equal measure. The surface had the bark's pattern frozen in it, the way time casts a mold, and the broken face glittered in a way you can call pretty, until you consider the speed of the flood that laid these trees down, the ash that made acid soup of forests, the way the Colorado Plateau rose like a slow animal and let wind carve the rest. I asked the empty air, "Where did you come from?" It tapped my wrist, once, gentle as a yes. The map in my head said there was a scatter of similar pieces along the east side of the loop where tourists like to just feel the weight. The park has 1,000,000 pounds of souvenirs that never left because a ranger crossed, inches with a story at the right time. I went there. The logs lay as they always lay, like stranded ships broken into bright hulls. But something had changed in the composition of the scatter, the way a table changes after you've taken a coin and then try to put it back without the host noticing. One log's end, sheared clean in the 1920s by a man with a saw and an appetite for mantelpieces, showed a pattern of growth rings I'd memorized from countless interpretive talks. That pattern was wrong now. 2 rings had shifted toward the center, compressing age into a tighter story. I blinked hard. I said the names of the minerals out loud like prayer: hematite, guthite, manganese, chalcedony, to steady my voice. The log did not answer. The piece in my hand did, a tiny knock like a knuckle under a door from a small room. A family approached with the light in their eyes. That means they are about to break a rule gently. The father said, "Can we pick up that little one just to—" and then saw my face and stopped. I heard myself say, too softly, "They move." And it sounded unhinged, even to me. I tried again. "They belong to each other," I said, which was true in the way a cathedral's stones belong to the cathedral, even if they once lay separate in a quarry. He nodded slowly, like a person humoring a street preacher. The kid reached anyway, and the mother pulled his hand back, and I watched their family story angle a degree toward good and filed the small relief away for later. I put Leonard's piece down next to a log that felt right in my chest, the way a lost button feels right in your fingers when you find its coat. The knock stopped. The wind started again, a long, dusty inhale across the painted desert, as if someone had finally remembered to breathe. I wrote the incident report in my notebook under the heading Lodgement, an old word for where something comes to rest. The park is full of good words like that. They make you feel like you can put the world in order if you name it in Latin. While I wrote, a tour group paused, and their guide told them about the Paiute arrow shafts of a thunder god, and the Navajo monster turned to stone. Old stories layered over older rocks, cautionary tales doing double duty as timekeepers. The tourists smiled the way people smile at mythology when the gift shop is near. When I stood, the log I had completed made a sound in my head that I didn't hear with my ears. It was a sense of arrangement, like the click you feel when a jar lid seats. I went cold all over, not with fear, but with the relief of having done something a place wanted. That's a dangerous feeling for a ranger. Places don't want. Places are places. But the petrified forest has always been human enough to hold stories like a mouth holds teeth, and sometimes you feel the bite. That night, Marta and I did the rounds at Rainbow Forest Museum, where the old conscience letter display used to live, a 3-ring binder of regret they took down when someone realized bad luck makes good press, and theft. We keep the letters, still. People mail rocks back with apologies inside, all the drama of the curse doing the work the law can't. I stood in the cool of the museum and imagined Leonard at his motel, the television on, and the piece no longer tapping in his hand, the relief of an ordinary weight. I wanted that for him. I wanted it for me. The piece I'd returned slept quietly in my report, like any other incident. Near midnight, a wind line hit the park like a soft truck, and the power hiccuped once. I went outside with my flashlight and stood under a sky so wide you go a little dumb, and I listened. The desert has a cricket for every kind of night. This night had the sound of breath through stone. Not ghosts, not monsters, not a curse. A geology noise you only hear if you kneel. I did, palm on a log, and I felt something like a slow pulse. Too slow to be a heart, too steady to be a machine. A tally, maybe, of weight given and weight taken. I thought about the old roadbed and the families who tossed pieces into trunks to bring home proof that they'd been somewhere strange. I thought about all the tiny knocks in motel rooms at midnight. A desert asking to be put back into the shape it remembers. In the morning, Leonard returned to say thank you in the stilted way of a man embarrassed by his own nerves. He touched the brim of a hat he hadn't been wearing yesterday, a gesture borrowed from a movie to make the moment respectable. He said he slept badly and well, a paradox that made too much sense. He asked if the curse was real, and I said the law is real, and the stories are useful. And he laughed like a student caught cheating by a teacher who decides this wants to be kind. He looked at the logs like they might look back. On my last loop that day, I saw the same pattern wrong on the sheared end I'd seen before, the growth rings too close together near the heart, or maybe I had misremembered. Memory is a lousy instrument in a place with this much time. I withdrew my hand before I could touch what I shouldn't. The wind picked up again and flipped a brochure on the trail like a scold. I chased it down and put it in my back pocket and told myself that if the forest does keep a second book, the one with our names and small mistakes and smaller repairs, maybe the only thing it asks is that we sign in the right place and leave before we take more than the weight of our own feet. The logs didn't answer. They lay as they have for millions of years, bright and broken and whole in a way we don't get to be. And for the first time since I put Leonard's piece back, the park felt content with me, as if my name had been entered, a lodgment made. The tally settled for one more day. The superstitions don't care how many times you've hiked them. They change their face like a card sharp. And by the time you realize the deck isn't honest, you've already bet your name. The trailhead was the same as every October weekend in Apache Junction. Truck beds clattering, dogs tugging, the warm smell of creosote and dust. Only this time I'd promised myself one thing. No side canyons, no shortcuts, no chasing stories about a miner who never wanted company. The Lost Dutchman legend works because it makes greed sound like faith. You convince yourself you're not after treasure, you're after closure, proof that the map of your life still has a blank space worth walking into. People die out here every season trying to prove that to themselves. They say they see lanterns where there are none, hear boots on gravel where there is only their own heart. They say the mountain calls. The mountain doesn't call. It waits. The first sign I was lost came early and kind. A fork I didn't remember. 2 cairns, 3 feet apart, like a choice someone had tried to make fair. The treasure loop doesn't fork there. I knew that like I know my own kitchen in the dark. I picked left because left felt honest, and the angle of the sun said I'd keep Weaver's needle on my eye line, and truth has a shape, and that spire is it. A mile later, the needle was gone, as if someone had slid a piece of cardboard in front of it. The canyon walls came close, and then closer, funneling sound into a narrow throat. My compass needle spun like it had somewhere better to be. There are tricks the desert plays that you can forgive. Mirages in heat, wind making a person out of Ocotillo, sun making your shadow a stranger. This was not that. This was my boot treads doubling back on themselves on clean stone. This was a trail marker that lifted off the ground and set itself 6 inches to the right when I blinked. This was a smell like metal where there should only be stone. The old stories say the superstitions hold an entrance to an underworld guarded by a thunder god. Tourists buy the postcard and laugh, but no one who grew up within sight of the gold-colored cliffs laughs in a storm. There's a reason the name took. There's a reason the same 3 words start every missing person report here. He was experienced. I heard it before I saw him. The sound of a shovel blade biting gravel and metal ringing. Some sounds carry across years unchanged. I turned a corner, and there he was in the wash, crouched by a dry fall, beard the color of antique rope, hat pulled low, shirt the unremarkable blue of every American workday. He looked like a photograph in a museum you glance at and forget until it looks back. I should have called out a greeting, made it ordinary. But fear makes you polite around strangers who don't fit. He didn't look up. He dug with the patience of someone who isn't tired because he isn't counting. The light around him had the quality of morning even, though my phone said 3:22 p.m. The shovel struck something with a tone that didn't belong to rock. He said gently, "Don't." And I realized I'd lifted my foot to step closer. The smart part of me, the part that knows the perils and state park advisories and the names of men who never came back, said turn around, mark your path with your own eyes, don't bargain with the wind. The other part leaned despite itself. You're off trail, I heard myself say, which is the kind of sentence you throw at a situation to see if it's real enough to be offended. He set the shovel down and finally looked up, and the look was not what I expected. It wasn't threat. It wasn't welcome. It was a craftsman sizing wood, deciding if a board would take stain. In a voice like creek water over tin, he said, "You're late." I should have lied. I should have said, "I don't know what you mean," and backed away and found the sun again. But the desert pulls old words from your pocket. "I'm not looking for it," I said, and the mouth of the wash held the lie gently and gave it back to us both. He smiled at that. Small, private. The way a man smiles when he finds he isn't alone in being ridiculous. "Nobody is," he said. "Not at first. Not when they're looking with their eyes." He tapped the ground with the shovel's handle, and the sound was wrong again. The same bright tone metal makes on the belly of something hollow. The logic of what happened next is hard to sell even to me. He didn't move toward me, he didn't gesture, he didn't invite. He simply set his palm on the dry fall, and the world moved like a chest sighing. The scrub shifted its green fractionally, as if it remembered a different breeze. The shade line crept uphill like a hand withdraws. And there, where the wash bent against the rock, was a seam I would have sworn wasn't there. Not a mine entrance. Not a pirate's X. A crack like you get in old dishes, hairline but deep, the kind water makes when it wants. He said, "Names." I gave him mine before my good sense could clamp down. He said it back perfectly. Accent flat, and began to talk like we were co-workers on a job I'd come late to. He told me about the Peraltas as if they'd left an hour ago, about a map that wasn't a map, but a way of looking, about a partner who couldn't keep a secret and a woman who could, and a weather pattern you had to wait 2 years for to see the right shine in the right place. He talked about ore, like a person talks about a dog they've taught tricks to. He did not say the word gold, and neither did I, because you don't say the thing that opens doors while they're opening. He told me the same stories I'd read in public libraries with the authority of a hand that had turned the pages first. The longer he spoke, the more ordinary he became. Calloused fingers, the short, bitten nails of a man who works his hands, a tan line where a ring might have been, a smell of sweat, not grave dirt. If he was a ghost, he was wedded to a fine edge by someone who hated romance. Why me? I asked, not because I thought I was special, but because if this was madness, it was at least polite madness, and I wanted to know if I could walk away from it and still be myself on the other side. He shrugged in a way that suggested a younger body once. Casual indifference leaned over strong bone. "You're polite to the land," he said, almost bored. "You don't call it yours. You don't go fast when you don't have to. You didn't bring a map someone else made and decide it was better than what your eyes told you." He lifted the shovel again, and the bright tone came back from the crack, indisputable as a bell. "And you're greedy," he added like a man remarking on the weather. "But you're ashamed of it. That helps." Greed is not a confession American mouths make easily. We rename it hustle and grit and legacy and the 3% match on a 401k. Out there, with the mountain pressed close and the air holding still like a witness, I couldn't rename it fast enough. I wanted to see the thing no one sees. I wanted to stand where the story stands and say I had. I didn't want money in the way money is used. I wanted proof that the world still had teeth and I could count them. That's greed dressed as wonder, but it's greed. He read it in me like an old friend's bad habit. "Step back," he said. "You don't want to be in the first breath." A smell came out of the seam that didn't belong to this century. Wet stone and metal, and a sweetness like old apples left in a cellar. I had the sick love you get right before a decision you'll regret. The crack widened until a man might go sideways through it. He didn't go in. He stood, hat in hand now, and for a second I saw the years on him like contour lines. A bird somewhere made a sound like a children's toy winding down. The light went odd again, like noon in a room with green curtains, and the hair on my forearms turned to needles. He said, almost tender, "If I point, you'll die." I said nothing. He said, "If I don't, you'll die different." Sometimes the only honest noise you make is the one your mouth refuses. I kept my lips closed over all the American answers. He nodded, as if I'd passed a test I didn't know he was giving. He took a small canvas bag from his pocket and shook out a single black stone that was not a stone at all, but a piece of iron shaped like a bean. It looked insignificant until he dropped it, and it rang the way a nail does when it's exactly the right length. He watched the way it rolled. He did not watch me. He said, "You turn around now and take the trail the mountain gives you, and when you sleep, you'll hear me digging. Or you go through, and on your fifth breath you belong to her." There was no threat in it. It was paperwork. My mouth opened to ask who her was, and he looked at me then with real interest for the first time, like I'd told a joke only a friend could tell. "The mountain," he said. "You say she, or you say they, or you say land if you're shy, but don't say it's empty. It has ears." He pushed the iron bean with his boot back to his palm like he'd done it 1,000 times. "They like names," he said, and the earlier question he'd asked, names, uncoiled like a snake between my feet. He had mine. The desert had mine. I wanted it back. There's an art to retreat that isn't turning your back. I stepped away without taking my eyes off the seam. The smell of old metal followed, the sweetness gone. He did not stop me. He went back to his work, slow, careful, the way a man digs when time doesn't press. I found the canyon's opening at an angle that shouldn't have been there, and the sky slapped me like a prizefighter. My compass needle went still. Weaver's needle returned to the horizon. The cardboard slid away. On the way down, other hikers passed me in cheerful pairs, unpunished as puppies, and I watched their faces for any sign that the mountain had their names in its pocket. It felt like a secret, so well kept you could buy postcards of it. At the trailhead, a board listed the usual warnings: heat, water, do not hike alone, tell someone, beware the weather. It did not list what a man might tell you in a wash if you came upon him digging in a light that doesn't belong to afternoon. That night, my faucet ran hot and spit flecks of rust, and I heard the shovel ring in the pipes. The sound was under my pillow, in the ice maker, traveling the little copper arteries of a house that thinks it knows itself. I dreamed the seam opened and swallowed my voice on the fifth breath, and I woke with my mouth dry as gypsum, and my heart like a rabbit in a snare. In the morning, I could have convinced myself it was nothing but the mountain had better lawyers than my rational mind. I drove back and walked the same path, and there was no fork, no wash, no dry fall, just the ordinary knuckles of volcanic rock and the distant clean shape of Weaver's needle. I stood a long time anyway, looking at the ground where the wash ought to be, and felt watched the way you feel watched by a storm not yet on the radar. People will tell you this story is about treasure and curses. It isn't. It's about what a place does with your name when you hand it over too easily. If you go looking for the Dutchman, you'll find men like him in every country and every bar, hands on shovels, eyes on seams, patient, and sure you'll join them if you're meant to. If you go looking for yourself, the mountain will let you listen to your own footsteps until you realize you're walking in circles. And then, if you're very polite, it will hand you back to the sun. If not, it will keep you in its paperwork, a ledger of late arrivals and polite retreats. When people ask if the mine is real, say the mountain is. Say it has ears. Say you kept your name. Then, if you're smart, keep your porch light off during storms. The first time the storm spoke, it borrowed a voice from the radio and said, "Stay calm," in a tone so familiar no one questioned where it came from. The second time, it used mine. Out on Route 66, between Kingman and Flagstaff, the asphalt runs like a vein through the high desert, wide open, sage and pinon holding the hills in a loose net. And the sky usually so honest you can see lies coming from 30 miles away. That afternoon, the horizon bruised. A wall formed where air should be. A vertical smear of earth climbing the sky, the kind of sudden architecture only this state can build. We knew the word for it. Haboob. A dust storm born from thunderheads, collapsing and flinging their downdrafts across the flats like a thrown sheet, and we did what people do when the textbook meets the windshield. We turned up the radio and told ourselves it would pass in 20 minutes. The radio loved it. Stations that usually argue about weather learned to sing it in a single voice. Pull over, lights off, foot off the brake, wait for the wall to break. Newscasters found their hymn and chanted it, calm and grave, as if we were all in the same church and had rehearsed the drill. The storm approached like a city moving, a perfect front rising thousands of feet, swallowing the color out of the world. A paler ribbon of dust raced ahead of it, a scout. The smell hit first, that metallic, old rain scent that makes your mouth feel like a battery. And then the wind reached under the truck and lifted, and pebbles struck the doors like thrown rice. The wall hit with no preamble, and daylight became a rumor. The radio said, "Stay calm." The radio said, "This is normal." The radio said, "This will last 10 to 30 minutes." The radio was not wrong, but it was not right enough. There's a human noise people make in dust storms when visibility goes to the distance of your own hand. It's not a scream or a prayer. It's a held breath you forget to unhold. The trucks that had pulled off into the gravel rang with it, a pressure that made the air hot and close. The world turned the color of an old photograph, then the color of a paper bag pressed to your face. The sage disappeared. The road disappeared. The sky was gone, and the shape of the windshield was all the geometry left. The radio popped and hissed, and voices layered. National Weather Service, a station in Kingman, a station in Flagstaff, someone CB. Then the voice, without call letters, clear and friendly. The tone of the morning guy who jokes about traffic. Stay calm. Reduce your breathing. The storm feeds on panic. No one flinched at that because it sounded like mindfulness, like the kind of advice they weave into weather warnings now. It was good advice anyway. The breath calmed, the heat dropped. Dust spread its grit across our tongues like a caution. In the muffled quiet, a woman in the SUV ahead of me opened her door and stepped out, and I reached for my horn before remembering the rule. Lights off, don't. Give the car behind you a false star to follow. Don't make sound that starts L. She stood with one hand on her door and turned her head left, as if listening to someone standing in the world beyond the world. Then she shut the door and sat and put her head on the steering wheel like a child who has been told to wait. The storm isn't a person. That's the first lie you tell to make this easier to hear. It's a physical event. Thunderstorm, downdrafts plummeting, hitting dirt, lifting it into a wall that travels 60 miles an hour and swallows towns and knocks down power lines and grounds planes and turns Phoenix into a snow globe of other people's fields. The wall that found us had traveled north from somewhere around Seligman, gathering tailings dust where it could, heavy metals tucked like knives among the silt, old seeds, lost papers, a million small freedoms gone airborne. When it reached Route 66, it found the line of cars like a necklace and stopped moving forward the way a crowd stops in front of a preacher. The wind still howled, the dust still scoured, but the wall bowed, held itself, presented. The radio said, "Stay calm," and then, in the exact cadence of my mother when I was 9, "It's all right, honey. Breathe slow." The thing about a human voice is your body obeys before your mind consents. My chest loosened, and my throat decided to let air in at a rate that made no mathematical sense for the conditions. The grit still scratched the soft places, but the panic receded a few inches, and in its place came a noticing. The dust had layers. The top ran fast, a river. The bottom flowed slow, a lake. Between them, the air thickened and thinned rhythmically, like something inhaling. The antenna on my truck quivered like a plucked string when the invisible trough passed. Breath in. The radio's static softened. Breath out. The static sharpened into articulation. We give animals credit for less because they do it with fur and eyes. The woman in the SUV ahead of me pressed her hands flat to the glass. The child in her back seat, small car seat kicking rhythmically, fell quiet. The radio said, "Don't turn on your emergency lights," which is standard. and then it said, "Don't say names." This was not standard. Something about the way the sound shaped itself into the letters of my name behind my teeth told me that if I said my own name out loud, the storm would have it, in the way places keep the shape of a thing long after the thing has gone. I am not superstitious in the way that clicks boxes on forms. I kept my mouth shut anyway. We stayed like that longer than 30 minutes. Time in a wall of dust abandons the clocks it came with. The engines idled, and some stopped idling, and drivers discovered whether they were the kind of people who keep a quarter tank or a full one. Dust found its way through seals you thought were tight. The radio learned our breaths and returned them to us sweeter, like a friend repeating a plan back to you, so you can hear it. People in the cars around me relaxed against the seats and then tensed in the same measure, a choreography orchestrated by wind. When one person stiffened, the dust around their car thickened and scratched harder, making them breathe faster. When they breathed faster, the radio hummed a half note higher, and other drivers' shoulders lifted. The feedback loop was a living thing. The wall leaned in, listening. On another frequency, the official voices kept up their catechism, pull off, wait it out. If you must drive, pull aside, let the devil pass. Reports came of power outages in Williams, of flights grounded in Phoenix, of visibility reduced to a measure better expressed in inches than miles. Science marched on like an old parade, dignified and correct. Inside the wall, we dealt in smaller measurements. 3 heartbeats per inhale, 2 per exhale, the metronome in your wrist. When people kept time with their fear, the dust pressed closer. When we all, by accident or grace, found the same slow count, the grit eased like a teacher noticing good behavior. A man 2 cars back threw his door open and began to run, hands up to cover his eyes, a form fleeing what it could not name. The dust around him surged not physically but with intent, corralling. He staggered off the gravel and onto what should have been shoulder, and ground disappeared under his foot. Not because there was a hole, but because the storm withheld support. He fell like a puppet with its strings cut. He lay very still, and then began to crawl on elbows toward the bright idea of a way. The dust around his face cleared like a mercy. He lowered his head and pressed it to the ground, and we could not see him anymore. The radio said, "Stay," and because it used a voice that made sense to him, he stayed. If you want the tidy ending where the wall passes, and we all clap and go home and make jokes later, you can have it. That is what happened, if you only look at the part where sky returns. The wind, as outflows will, lost momentum as the engine thunder cells spent themselves, and the wall, as walls will, decayed into a brown smear across the horizon, the kind of stain you photograph and text to someone with the caption, "Arizona doing Arizona again." The engines restarted. The children cried like they were coming down from anesthesia. The man who had run stood up dusty and ordinary and hid his shaking by checking under his hood. The woman in the SUV wiped her eyes and looked at her child and said his name, and nothing awful happened, which did not mean nothing had been waiting to. The radio returned to music and ads with a hiccup, as if someone had remembered to flip a switch. What doesn't show up in your photos is what the dust knew about you while you sat very still. This is the part that makes Americans itchy, because it suggests that the world is not a screen you watch, but a room you share. The wall that found us didn't have eyes or a mind, but it had a hunger perfectly matched to the way panic accelerates. It liked the breath we threw off when we were afraid. It thickened when we obliged. It thinned when we starved it. If that sounds like religion, good. Religions were built to help people stop feeding things that don't love them back. If it sounds like science, also good. There is a reason the advice for haboobs is to pull over, turn everything that shines off, and wait. And wrapped in that reason, like a small animal is an older one. Don't give your body to the storm more than it requires. Days later, I stood in a grocery store aisle in Flagstaff, and a woman argued on her phone about whether to take I-40 or cut down through Seligman, and a shelf talker for a brand of bottled water had a tiny speaker that whispered when someone walked by. And for a fraction of a second, the sound of my name shaped itself in the cooled air. I turned, and there was nothing but paper towels and an advertisement talking to nobody. I thought of the man face down in dust being spared his own breath. I thought of how easy it would be to mistake kindness for control, control for safety, safety for exemption. What I tell people now, when the sky goes sepia and the wall stands up clean against the interstate, is the same thing the radio will. Pull off, lights off, foot off the brake, wait. But I add a thing that doesn't fit on advisory bulletins. Count. Pick a number and make your body obey it. If a voice tells you to say a name, don't. If it borrows a voice you love to tell you how to breathe, be grateful and remember something is listening. When the light returns and your heart unlocks, drive on. And when you get where you're going, you can tell the story of the storm that tried to eat your hurry and found you too calm to chew. You can laugh. Just don't forget who taught who. They said the water at Canyon Lake keeps its dead polite, quiet under the green surface where the salt river swells and shrinks. But the summer we learned the rhyme. The lake learned our names and returned them from places we couldn't see. We were the kind of people who joke about legends to make them safe. Whisper La Llorona into a bottle like it's just a spooky password. Grin when the echo comes cheap. And that's how it started, with a dare and a syllable repeated for the thrill of hearing ourselves back. Not because we believed a drowned girl will come if you call her. The sun was low enough to make the water look like split glass, and the rocks around the coves glowed orange like someone had warmed them from inside, and the afternoon smelled of sunscreen and spilled beer and the algae you only notice when you stop moving long enough to let it take your ankles. The rhyme we'd been taught was a playground corruption, not the old words, but rhymes don't care about translations. They care about rhythm, and ours was eager and wrong, and the lake took it anyway. Say it once, and the tale says she appears in the water, a pale hint where your reflection should be. Say it twice, and she replaces you clean. Say it a third time, and she replaces you everywhere. A sequence that's older than this reservoir, and born on rivers that know how to carry grief downhill until it turns to silt. We said it once because we were not brave and wanted to be. A sing-song in the late light. And the surface shivered the way water does when a bigger fish turns far below. The shape that rose into the flat of our reflections was subtle enough to be a trick. A long hair where none of us had hair loose, a line of white that wasn't boat wake, the suggestion of a shoulder moving just under. Someone laughed the laugh that says, we all saw the same thing we will not admit. The second time, the air cooled like a grocery freezer, and the lake gave us back our faces out of order. In the mirrors of the water, mouths opened, but not on the faces to which they belonged. The sound of our names came out of the wrong reflections, tinny and far, as if shouted from the drain of an empty pool. You can keep a party going through a lot. You can keep it going through story, and through a dare, and through a gust that smells like rain when the sky is hard blue. You can keep it going until one person goes still. For us, it was Cass. She had been the bravest, saying the name twice without a flinch, smiling like a girl in a photograph from a decade we don't live in. And then she froze with her feet in the green, and her hands pressed to her thighs, and her mouth said no, without a sound. The water tightened into a mirror, the weeds at the edge stopped their gentle insect movement, and the space where her reflection should have been emptied itself by a degree, as if someone had drained the image from the surface with a careful hand. When the image came back, it wore her face, like a child wears a parent's shirt, too big in some places, wrong in the shoulders, right in the eyes. It smiled at us with a concentration that isn't joy. Cass did not smile. No one said the name the third time. We are not protagonists. We are careful animals with lusts and breaks. The lake did not require the full ritual. It had our attention. That is all a story needs to bloom. A small ripple crossed the surface, heading toward us against the obvious wind, koan simple and insulting to physics. It reached the line of our ankles and hesitated like a dog when you hold out a hand to sniff. Then the water thinned where our legs broke it, becoming glassy, and the reflections cleaned themselves like windows. In the mirror, a girl stood in our place, hair long, dress indistinct the way things are indistinct underwater, white and moving, and her clothes wrinkled wrong, as if they were hanging in a current. Her mouth moved, and the sound clenched the muscles at the base of my skull. A mother's wail, long and low, too old for the body making it. The childhood warnings we had learned as jokes. They come to the river after dark. They take what isn't watched, sharpened their teeth. Legends arrive in American houses like televangelists, promising the old truths in a new package, making everything sound like a choice. We chose to back away from the water without turning our backs on it. The lake dislikes backs. The girl in the mirror shifted with us, staying placed where our reflection should be, which is not how mirrors work unless the thing in them prefers it that way. The shoreline rock that had been warm under us went cool, heat stolen by shadow that didn't exist in the air. Our phones left on a towel lit and died with no notification, just the idea of attention. The rumor that phones die where she walks felt suddenly less like rural superstition and more like an ordinary fact, the way potholes are facts. Water carries stories better than glass. It remembers them longer, too. Cass was shivering now, though the air still had the heavy heat that slows the day into syrup. Her reflection had not returned. The girl who wore it touched the surface with one finger, and the water dimpled into a perfect, stubborn circle that refused to spread, as if the lake was fighting its own physics to keep an image intact. I said, without deciding to, "Lo siento," because some apologies should come in the language that carried the hurt this far. The girl in the water cocked her head like a bird, and in the reflection of my face, I watched my mouth form the words I had not said yet. "No Lores, don't cry," in a voice that belonged to my grandmother, a woman who had warned me never to say names at lakes because lakes are gossips and will tell anyone who listens what you called out. For a moment, the water seemed to consider mercy. Then the water considered hunger. There are rules, and there are rituals disguised as rules. Canyon Lake has posted rules. No glass, no jumping from cliffs, life vests for children. The ritual we learned fast was older. Do not leave a seat empty by the water at dusk. Do not say a name more than you must. Do not let your reflection be the last to leave. When people drown, the counselors will tell you how silent it is, how uncinematic. This was not that. The water took noise first. The lake gathered the sound of our friends into its flat and held it. When Jules tried to curse, the air turned her syllables into bubbles that popped against her lips like fish kisses. When Theo reached for Cass's shoulder, the reflection hand reached first and met his, palm to palm, and the cold ran up his arm and over his shoulder like a fast animal, and he fell back with his eyes white and his lungs unsure if they were lake or air. The kind of fear that comes next is not useful. It makes you perform bright motions for gods that are not watching. We dropped towels into water, as if textiles have jurisdiction. We said prayers we do not believe in and forgot the keys to trucks. We tried to pull the reflection out by pulling the girl whose image it stole and discovered what mirrors know. You cannot grab an absence. It wasn't the dress, white and floating the way stories promise. It wasn't the long hair blown by wind that didn't touch us. It wasn't even the face, which was any girl's face, and every girl's face. Eyes rinsed pale by 1,000 retellings. It was the way she looked at Cass. Not with malice, not with pity, but with a recognition so complete it felt like theft. As if she'd waited exactly this long to wear this version of a life. We broke the ritual wrong a dozen ways, and still something in us remembered another older one that belonged to rivers before this reservoir had a name. We got loud, not with shouts but with story. Jules began to talk fast about the first time she came to this lake with her dad, how he'd told her the water hides stone like a lie hides teeth. Theo, kneeling with his arm wrapped in his shirt, said the names of all the coves where he'd learned to swim. I said the road numbers, the dam's date, the builders, the tribes whose fish traps lie upstream under mud and future. People say spirits love names. They forget that places do too, and they forget that naming can be defense when it is not an invitation. The lake's surface shivered, and for a breath the reflections tore like cellophane, and the girl's hand lost the perfect match to Theo's palm. Cass spoke. She said one word, and it wasn't a name. It was enough, and it sounded like a woman who has cleaned other people's messes too long. The reflection of her mouth formed it a beat after, like a child learning to talk by watching lips. She stepped back, an inch, a breath, the space you give a stranger in a line, and the lake did something I will never forgive it for. It gave us hope. The surface wrinkled with breeze as if the day had remembered how to move. The weeds made their tidy insect motions. The girl's dress lost its insistence and hung like fabric in a closet. Cass's face slid back into place on the water. Not perfect, not entirely, but enough to make the smallest of us laugh a single, dangerous note. There is a tax for hope. The lake took it in the old currency. We did not see the boy go in. We only felt the sudden neatness of the group without his noise. He had been the one with the bottle cap trick. The pop flicked off his thumb in a bell sound. The cap lay on the towel like a coin on a dead man's eye. The ripple where his body had been was so disciplined that I thought for a second he'd stepped back to leave room for someone else. Then Jules screamed out his name in the voice that empties you, and the water cupped the scream and kept it the way vaults keep air. The girl in the lake turned her head, and for the first time since we'd begun the stupid rhyme, her face changed. She looked sorry. Or she looked hungry in a smaller way. Or she was a mirror, and we were seeing the thing we'd brought. People will tell you that if you see her, you must run or pray or close your eyes. They will give you recipes for mercy cooked out of fear and heritage and the need to feel like what takes from the world can be bargained with. We did not bargain. We took back the smallest thing we had left, which was our mouths, and we closed them, and we backed away, and we did not look again into the green. The lake prefers eyes. We made it make do with backs. The boy did not come up in that second or the next. Even if he had, the reservoir would have kept him a while. That is what reservoirs do, hungry even when they are serving a city so polite it apologizes to the faucet. The sun went dull behind, a cloud we hadn't noticed forming. Someone on the far shore shouted something choked and ordinary, like snacks. The last thing the girl did before she pulled the water flat and went where reflections wait was cruel in a way that makes sense once and never again. She put up a hand, palm out, like a swimmer at a lesson, and mouthed a word through the skin of the lake. It might have been Madre. It might have been mine. It might have been my name. We left. We left like cowards and like saints, careful and shaking. And when we hit the gravel of the lot and the ordinary world asserted its smells and sounds, we became very American about it. We called who we needed to call. We told the version of the story that is digestible by people who have never said a name into a lake, because they think language is a leash and not a door. Weeks later, a kid posted a half-minute video that made the local news, a glitch colored nothing of water, and a voice warped by wind, saying something that sounded like a name and a prayer and a warning. The comments filled with the usual hoax, filter, tragedy, thoughts, and prayers. And underneath, an old woman wrote, "Don't say names," at the water, and no one liked it. Here is what I will say to you, because you will go to Canyon Lake in some clean afternoon and think the rules are for other people. If someone teaches you a rhyme, forget it. If the water gives you a face that is not yours, look away. If you must say a name, say it into your own hands and keep it there. And if the lake returns a voice you love, do not answer. Not even once. The first thing the clerk said at the Winslow Motel wasn't welcome. It was your back. And he slid the registration card across the counter with a practiced flick, like this loop had run enough times to file his movement smooth. The lobby had that tired Route 66 nostalgia, faded postcards, a jukebox that didn't work, a sun-bleached root shield on the wall, and the key tags were real metal rectangles that made you feel like your hand had weight again. The card had my handwriting on it already. Same name, same address, same little flourish on the capital letter I only add when I'm rushing, and the date was tomorrow. There was even a note in the corner, late checkout comped. The clerk didn't look smug about the trick. He looked tired, the way you look when you've rehearsed the same line until it isn't language anymore. He said the elevator was slow tonight. He said try not to use the ice machine after midnight because it startles the night manager. He said nothing about the receipt's bottom line, the one that listed checkout, 10:14 a.m., and below it in smaller print, time of death, 10:14 a.m. Timing is a cruel currency in the desert. Everything's on its own clock. The trains that never seem to stop blowing through. The wind that's brave at dusk and gone by 10. The way a day can feel like long, polished metal, and then snap. I took the stairs because the elevator doors didn't want to open all the way, and because the flicker in the fluorescent light made the humming in my teeth worse. The hallway carpet had that stubborn, clean smell that comes from forever shampooing the same dust. A maid's cart at the end of the hall sat like a city in siege, tiny bottles and plastic-wrapped cups stacked faithful, towels folded into a geometry of apology. Room 2 Evertoinks had my key tag number stamped into it with a stubborn, permanent font. And when I opened the door, the air hit me with the exact temperature of my thermostat at home, a detail that felt like a hand on my shoulder. There are two kinds of motel rooms, the kind that pretend you haven't been here before, and the kind that act like they're remembering you. This one had my life laid out in small, precise arrangements. The remote was angled toward the bed, not the chair. The water cup was already filled to the line I always pour to when I'm thinking of other things. A single mint lay on the desk beside a folded scrap of motel stationery. The handwriting on it was mine, and the first line said you can still go, and the second line said you won't. The TV turned itself on to the local weather without sound. Map of the state, in colors you don't believe in until the wind hits, the little pinwheels spinning where fronts grind gears, and the scroll read, high winds expected along I-40 after 10 a.m. Avoid travel if possible. I turned the TV off, and the screen reflected the room with the wrong kind of dark. In the reflection, my face had a tiny smear near the temple I reached to, wipe, and found nothing. If you want to survive alone in places like this, you cultivate rituals that make you feel like gravity's on your side. Shoes against the wall, soles down, bag on the chair, zipper closed, wallet in the nightstand. Never put your keys where the bed can swallow them. I added a new one. Don't read the note again. I brush my teeth with the kind of attention you pretend is meditation, and the mirror respected the boundaries of glass until I looked too long. Then it offered me a half-breath of a different angle. My back. A door that wasn't there. A bedspread in a pattern this room had never used. And I stepped away, like I'd caught a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. The AC unit banged once as if someone had knocked from the inside. I turned the volume on the TV up to 6, my habit, and put it back to 5 because the remote jumped. I lay down without taking off my shirt because leaving your shoes on is theatrics, and leaving your shirt on is intent. Sleep in a place like that is the wrong kind of thin. It's not rest. It's a membrane you float under, watching yourself breathe from across the room. Dreams adapted to the decor quickly. The same curtains, the same light from the parking lot crawling across the cheap fabric, the same hum as a highway piano. Only the angles were off. The clock on the nightstand read 10:13 in a dream that felt like noon. The minute turned, and the room held its breath, and the hall outside made a sound like a soda can collapsing, and the door did not open, but the air made space for someone anyway. When I woke, My heart was already teaching my ribs how to count to 14 and back. The bedside clock read 2:14, and an Amtrak moaned through town like a calf being weaned. The note on the desk had a new line I hadn't written. It said, "Stay in the bed, and it can't take you." That's the sort of rule you invent when you want to believe in kid logic. It was also the sort of rule my mind could hold at 3 in the morning, so I held it. The wind moved something heavy outside. A dumpster lid thumping like an amiable drunk. Somewhere, a TV bled laughter into a wall. The ice machine coughed where it shouldn't breathe. I lay flat, eyes open, practicing stillness, as if stillness could fool a clock. On the ceiling, a stain bloomed the shape of a state I couldn't name and then remembered. Oklahoma, a place that holds storms like a grudge. The motel's plumbing spoke in a voice you can almost convince yourself is ghost. Then the neighbor's shower made it polite. At 6, the night thinned. Motel mornings have a specific brightness, a sweetness like powdered orange juice and waffle batter that feels like mercy. The parking lot filled with the choreography of men who know their tools. Doors open, doors close, unintelligible greetings that mean underpaid and alive. I showered like I might wash the night off. The mirror decided to play nice and return my face without editorial. The note on the desk said, "Late checkout comped. Enjoy a slow morning," in the clerk's tidy print. And under it, in my hand, "Don't open the door at 10:14. People put talismans on their bodies. I put this one in my mouth as a sentence and kept it there. Breakfast downstairs was a parade of the American ordinary. A man in a fluorescent vest buttered 6 slices of toast with the concentration of a surgeon. A woman in scrubs said she was on nights and laughed like someone who hadn't decided what day it was yet. The coffee tasted like a promise kept just well enough. The clerk from last night manned the front desk with a dignity thwarted by a cartoon cactus on his mug. He looked at me like he knew a thing he wished he didn't. I said something about the wind picking up, and he said something about flags, and we did the small talk that keeps towns running. On the way back to the stairs, I checked the lobby clock against my phone. Minute for minute. A child knocked the vending machine, and it knocked back. The elevator door was open at my floor with an etiquette that felt wrong. I didn't look inside. The hallway was empty of carts and apologies. My door was as I'd left it. The lock clicked with a satisfaction I could live on. 10:05, 10:06. The TV put on a morning show with a host who smiled like a dare. I sat on the bed and didn't take off my shoes and practiced being the kind of person who could ignore a knock. 10:10. The AC clicked and sighed. The stain on the ceiling held. A train went somewhere better. 10:13. The kind of silence you get when people hold their breath in the same building happened, a thing you feel in your teeth. The door knocked softly once, the polite kind you want to answer because you were raised where neighbors matter. The second knock had the cadence of anyone who has ever known your rhythm. The third knock wasn't a knock. It was 2 fingers on wood, the way a mother taps a door before she makes her voice gentle. Don't open the door at 10:14 sounds like a child's game until the minute turns. There is a tone in rooms that only appears when you want to disobey yourself. The wind outside hit whatever it had been trying to lift and succeeded. The metal complaint loud and final. Somewhere down the hall, a television clicked to snow from a decade it didn't remember. The door's handle pressed down a fraction without making a sound and held, not testing, just asserting that doors are agreements, and this one had come due. I sat very still and thought about the kind of man I am. I am the kind who keeps a promise if he writes it and breaks it, if someone he loves speaks through wood and asks. The fourth knock was my father's, the one where he would pause after, giving you a chance to compose your face before you lied. It is the easiest thing in the world to explain what you did to an audience who wasn't there. You say you kept your promise because that's the kind of man you want to be after, not during. You say you stayed in the bed and let the minute roll under you like a wave, and when it passed, you were still there, and the door remembered itself, and the handle lifted back, and the room exhaled. That is one version, and it is not false. Another version is that the door never opened because it didn't have to. The room can let something in without hinges. The air can make space without movement. The minute can enter your chest like a key and turn. The thin thing you slept under can wrap your arms to your sides, kind and firm. Your face can learn a shape your face has never learned. The wide-eyed surprise of someone who has found out exactly how many breaths he has left. The note on the desk added one last line in no one's hand. It said, "You do this every time." The clerk at the desk didn't look surprised when I came down later than late, just took the key tag like it had been warm 100 times here in this salt and sun lobby. Outside, the flags on the route shield snapped like hands. The sky had that metallic brightness wind brings to desert mornings, the kind that makes signs meaner and shadows thinner. A tumbleweed did an on-the-nose dance across the lot to let me know I lived in a movie when the script needed it. I got in my car and my hand sat on the wheel longer than a man's hand should. The radio wanted to tell me about gusts along the interstate, about semis flipping like toys, about closures and detours and patience. I turned it off. I opened the glove compartment. The receipt inside was dated tomorrow. You can leave a place like that and swear you will never go back. You can keep the promise until the road runs out of other places and the wind finds new work. Then one night you'll be tired in the right way, and the wrong sun will be down, and the clerk will say, "You're back," and the key will be heavier than it should be, and the calendar will be off by the amount of a lie you tell yourself to sleep. People like to say time is a river. In Winslow, it's a hallway with a stain in the ceiling, shaped like a state you can't name until it becomes you. If you ever find yourself in room 214 and you wake at 2:14 with metal in your mouth, count your breaths. If someone you love knocks the way only they do, hold your hands palm up and let the air see you are not opening. And if you can't help yourself and you turn the handle anyway, do it at 10:15. If there's a price for that, it's at least not on the receipt. They call it a felony to cut a saguaro, but out here near Tucson, the desert has older punishments. And the first time the cactus screamed, none of us believed it was the plant until the second scream came from a mouth that wasn't there. We were weekend idiots with headlamps and a handheld recorder, a dare made meaner by moonlight. Go find the big one, the giant with the lightning scar and the bent arm, the one ranch hands whisper about because it wails on full moons like a person buried wrong. Sage and mesquite did their clean medicinal thing in the air, and the ground had that crust that turns to powder if you disrespect it. And every ocotillo looked like a cathedral's ribs drawn by a nervous hand. The saguaro we were after lived in a shallow wash, older than any of us by a century easy, arms pitched at angles that made you feel like it was trying to explain something, complicated with gestures. Animals know to give it a berth. You could see the way, trails bent around it, rabbit and coyote, and the soft chaos of javelina, all the little highways obeying a traffic law no one had posted. We set the recorder on a flat stone and talked the way you talk to make fear small, about work and bills and how the desert makes all that feel like toys. And when the wind dropped, the silence had the clarity of a clean knife. Then it came. A sound that didn't belong to the night list, not owl, not coyote, not neighbor's stereo across a mile. A long, ragged exhale that rose at the end as if someone had decided to be brave in the middle of crying. It rippled through the shallow wash like heat, and the big saguaro took on the attention of a portrait. Suddenly, there was nothing in the frame that mattered except its scar, pale and puckered down the column like a seam in badly stitched skin. There are stories people tell to be polite to fear, and there are the true ones. The polite version says it's wind through a woodpecker hole, a natural flute, a trick of chambers, and cactus ribs making music. The true one is what we heard next. The second scream worked its way up from a human throat and hit the note a person makes when they're trying not to be heard and fail. the sound of a name bitten off after the first syllable, and my body knew it before my mind allowed it. This thing was a mouth. I'd like to tell you we left then because we're smart, but smart is a mortgage word. We were curious, which in the desert is greed with prettier clothes. The scar wasn't a woodpecker hole. It was a lightning path, a ragged zipper of tissue that made a funnel of every gust. And when a breeze slid down the wash, the cactus took it and returned it as something learned, not accidental. Theo, who brought the recorder, said, "Say that again like you would to a bar story." And the wash answered with the smallest imitation of his tone, like a child shaping its mouth around a family word. I stepped closer than respect would allow, and the saguaro's spines, long, pale, deceptively elegant, gave the air a warning shimmer, and the cactus released a breath I felt on my wrists, cool and moist. Desert miracle turned insult. It smelled wrong, sweet, and animal, the way a closed-up room smells when grief lives there. And something in me recoiled like a hand from a stove, and something else leaned in the way you lean into a dare you gave yourself. People think of saguaros as slow, dignified elders with bird condominiums. They don't think of them as containers with choices. This one had made a choice long ago when lightning opened it and something climbed in. The recorder clicked softly, a red dot insisting on its professional memory. And Theo, idiot Prince, took a knife from his pocket, the useful kind, not macho, a tool that had opened paint cans and boxes and one Christmas thing, and said, "We can get a better sample if we nick the scar, like the desert is a lab and we're grant-funded." He didn't get the blade within an inch before the saguaro screamed again, not louder. A thing like that doesn't need volume, but closer, as if it had waited for a mouth to approach before showing its own. The sound came through the knife, a vibration so intimate it ran up Theo's bones, turned his hand to glass. He dropped the knife, and his palm bled a neat constellation where spines had kissed him for his trouble. The desert has consequences older than courtrooms. I said his name. The cactus said it back, almost. The vowel wrong, the mouth too careful, like someone pronouncing a word from a language they don't love yet. Jules started crying, not big tears, not fear theater, just the blunt welling that happens when something rearranges what you think the world holds. And the saguaro made a sound that matched hers, not to mock, but to practice. Every time we breathed, it learned, and every time we spoke, it revised, and every time wind moved, it captured a new syllable. And we stood there, feeding it a choir. Later, when we listened to the recording, we heard what hunger sounds like with patience. The thing inside that cactus wasn't a ghost in the sheet sense. If it had ever been a person, it had dried into a purpose, the way fruit dries into sugar and changes shape. You don't cut saguaros because it's illegal. The old-timers will tell you you don't cut them because they hold more than water. Lightning gave this one a door, and time gave it grammar. When the next gust rolled down, the cactus found the edges of Theo's dropped name and finished it. Dead right. His mother's way. The exact way she says it when she's found a dish in the sink after he swore the kitchen was clean. He answered her without meaning to. Muscle memory is a betrayal at midnight. And the saguaro took that too, tucked it into the ribbed vault of its body. And I knew then how a plant bleeds. Not juice, not red, but names. Cut one, and the desert learns a sound you don't get back. Theo, stubborn and 30, reached for his knife with his unbloodied hand like the lesson hadn't landed, and Jules grabbed his wrist hard enough to bruise a promise, into it. And the cactus made a small sound that wasn't a scream. It was a laugh, wearing a veil. We backed away on the crust, careful, not to spare the plant, but to spare ourselves. The desert hates flailing and rewards dignity with speed. The saguaro's arms, one up, one bent like a broken question, held their positions like a host pretending not to notice the way their guests are leaving early. When we were 10 paces out, the wash did its small animal noises again. Gnats, a moth making paper of itself on a yucca stalk, far coyotes doing their math, and the saguaro loosed one last sound, not to lure, but to place us. My name, then Jules's, then Theo's, in an order only a thing that had listened would choose. We didn't run because running would have given it our fear, in the key it had almost perfected. We walked out to the road like parents leaving a party to keep a child from making a second scene. On the drive back to Tucson, the desert did its January thing, where the night feels cleaner than any prayer, and the city lights made a polite fence against what we had left behind, and we told ourselves we were ridiculous. Sleep did not agree. Jules dreamed of a room made of green ribs, where her mother's voice came from the wall and asked her to bring water to a place that had never known ocean. Theo woke to his phone saying his name in the exact tilt of his father on the night the police called, and he threw the phone across the room, not because he's dramatic, but because he has a body that remembers how to survive its own brain. I lay awake and counted the seconds between the heat kicking on and the house settling and learned a small humility. There are notes your home can make that match the desert's alphabet, and if you've taught the desert your vowels, it can teach your vents to talk back. 3 weeks later, a storm rolled through in a manner the news likes to name, and lightning walked down 3 neighborhoods in clean high heels, and one bolt, she loves what she loves, went back to our wash. They found the big saguaro days later, torn open along its old scar. Ribs exploded. Internal architecture made public like a chest cracked for surgery. And inside was nothing a camera could sell. Dry heart, web of wood, a column where water used to be, and in the dirt under it, in the rain-made mud, lines that looked like writing. Wind will do that, people said. Wind makes art where artists aren't. Wind writes and erases and writes again, and they posted photos that 1,000 strangers liked and then forgot. We went out alone, bad choice, and stood at the edge of the ruin and listened with the reverence of funerals, because you can mock yourself and still know when something that wanted stayed has left. The air didn't smell wrong anymore. It smelled like clean-cut wood and rain's old memory. Jules whispered the cactus, "Hey, thank you," like you'd whisper a friend who kept your secret and didn't keep you. And the wash did not answer with a person's sound. It moved a handful of grit in a small dismissive slide and made room for a seed. Theo crouched and touched the split rib and flinched at the memory in his palm, and then kept his hand there anyway. A penance no one asked for. We took nothing, not a spine, not a sliver. Even our dumb wants had learned some grammar. Out on the road, a truck passed with a cut saguaro in the bed. Legal because it wore the tag you get when you pay and wait and ask permission. And the sight made something in my teeth itch. Maybe the law is enough most days. Maybe the older rules only matter when you decide they do. Or maybe the desert writes its own paperwork and files it in the spines and ribs of anything tall enough to catch a storm's attention. And the only receipt you get is whether your house starts saying your name when the heater kicks on. If you go out there on a full moon looking for a sound to post, you might get lucky and hear wind flute through a woodpecker's home. It's beautiful, and you'll feel big for naming it. If you're less lucky, you'll hear the thing that learned to wear you. Don't teach it. Don't spare it the work of discovering your vowels on its own. And if your idiot friend reaches for a knife, steal it, bleed in his place, give the plant the smallest lesson you can afford, and take your names home uncut. The cactus will still call later from your vents and your drain, and the dryer's low moan, trying your syllables like a child in a new language. Call back if you must, but not with your name. Out there, everything that lives wants water or the shape of a mouth. Don't be both. They call Vulture City a ghost town because the tourists like the word. But the night the church burned for us, ghost meant paperwork, names written in smoke, and returned before dawn without signatures. We weren't ghost hunters or bravely stupid. We were 2 maintenance contractors hired to check the solar rigs and camera housings the new owners had installed to make history safer for daylight visitors. The plan was simple. Arrive late, tighten what the wind loosens, lock what curiosity opens, leave a checklist that said, everything was fine. Vulture mind doesn't care about plans. The whole place feels like an argument between gold and the people who thought they owned it. The church sits a polite distance from the main drag, like guilt. Whitewashed in old photos, bones gray now, a rectangle of weathered boards that lean as one. Bell long gone, doorway a black mouth. Locals say it burns at midnight and stands perfect at dawn. Locals also say lots of things. Businesses need a story. We parked by the assay office and did our work with headlamps and the professional chatter of people who've learned to keep nerves from making jokes. Wind slid over the tailings piles and brought the dry, bitter smell of old chemistry. Mercury rumor and cyanide memory you can't really smell but think you can. The stars felt too low, the way they do in Arizona when the sky forgets to be polite. Every board creaked like a tongue learning words. By 11:40, the site was buttoned, and we should have left, but a rhythm had settled over the place that made our steps slow, as if time here had decided to run a bit thick. When the hour was 11:57, the air cooled all at once, not breeze, not front, like someone had opened a cellar door. The church's doorway darkened further, an impossible trick, and a thin thread of heat unrolled across the ground as neat as a fuse. There's a specific quiet on mines at night. No birds, no mechanical hum, just the desert's dental click and the soft settling of structures that should have fallen 100 years ago and refuse. That quiet took one long breath, and at midnight the church caught. It wasn't the romantic lick of flames up a hymn book. It was spontaneous remembrance. The interior lighted itself from the back, a slab of orange blooming like sunrise in reverse. The windows lit as if someone had drawn curtains of fire and pulled them open. The door stood as a pure rectangle of brightness, and the first heat was not outdoors heat. It came with the close, animal exhale of fire in a room with a door you can't find. My partner, Clay, said, "No," the way a man says it to a dog bolting into the road, and took a single step forward as if to fetch a child. We weren't going to go in. We aren't heroes. But the job and the human in us walked to the doorway, because if a building is burning, where no building should be burning at midnight, you go stand near it and say things like, "Is anyone here?" and "It's okay," and move back to the light where we can see you. Clay called out, "Hello," and the fire answered with a long, low intake that sounded too much like someone deciding whether to forgive. The doorway framed a corridor that shouldn't have been there. The interior expanded, perspective wrong, pews running longer than the footprint allowed, shadows leaning toward us like parishioners late to stand. Heat didn't hurt the way it should. It sat on the skin like a hand taking measurements. The first figure was smoke. Not an apparition, not theatrical. Smoke in the shape of a woman who had learned to hold herself together long enough to be seen. Her hair moved like a thing in water. Her arms were folded in front of her, in the way of someone who has stood a long time trying not to leave. She didn't look at us. She looked at the door, then at the pews, then at the door again, and then she walked in a loop you could have timed with a watch. When she reached the place where center aisle would meet the threshold, she paused, as if the next step would require permission. Clay said, "Ma'am," because manners are older than fear, and the smoke took on the outline of a face, not because it had one, but because our nerves needed a place to hang mercy. Behind her, a line of others coalesced. Not men or women, not minors or wives, just the arrangement of bodies in a ritual. Some kneeling in motion, some standing with the stiffness of decision. One in the back row, with shoulders bowed the way people bow when they are trying to be smaller than their guilt. We told ourselves it was heat distortion and old wood, and the mind's soft tooth finding something to chew. Then the bell rang, and there is no bell at Vulture City's church. The sound came like a nail, struck exactly true against the roof of your mouth. The figures flinched in unison, a practiced choreography that had been waiting for its cue for a century. The fire brightened, not outward, but inward, filling them the way light fills stained glass, and they began to move with intention toward the door. The rule in stories is, you don't stand in the threshold. Clay caught my sleeve, and we stepped aside without thinking. The heat moved past like a procession. As they came, the figures softened. Less smoke, more ash, edges collapsing and reblooming, as if they were crossing from somewhere thick into somewhere meaner. The first woman reached the doorway and thinned to a single ribbon of gray that twisted, hung, and broke like a sentence unfinished. She did not pass. She became the taste of old paper on my tongue. There are 100 rational acts you can perform in a moment like that. You can get the fire extinguisher. You can call the number the owners gave you and say the site has a situation. You can back away and wait for logic to reassert itself. We did none of those. Clay stepped to the side of the door and put his hand flat on the exterior wall, the way people lay a hand on a casket to feel, the proof of wood. He said, "I'm sorry." Not dramatically, just the way you say it in kitchens when you mean it. The fire inside dimmed a fraction, like a temper cooled by the first apology it trusts. The line of figures wavered and reformed. A man-shaped burn of smoke near the front turned his head toward Clay. Not a face, but a gesture, an acknowledgement of someone arriving late to a service and standing in the back. The bell rang once more, softer. A private note. Proceed. If you grew up anywhere with ritual, you know what to do with a door that won't let things through. You make a new door. You don't break. You hold. We took 3 steps back and cleared the threshold with our bodies, making space like ushers. The figures moved again, and this time when the first one reached the edge of the heat, she pressed a palm, blot of darker gray, against the air, as if testing for glass. Clay, fool in the good way, raised his palm and touched his hand to the hot emptiness 1 inch from hers. Something true happened then. The heat didn't burn. It weighed. It regarded. It moved through the air between 2 hands that hadn't touched anything but work all week, and it learned the shape of permission. The woman thinned again, but this time the line did not break. It pulled through like silk through a ring. The air took her, not the ground, not the night beyond. Just the air, relieved of its appointment with fire. She was gone in the way a breath is gone. The second followed. The third stumbled, gathered, learned. We stayed like that longer than a body should, palms raised, heat traveling into chest and shoulder, until we shook. And the church did its part, making and unmaking its congregation in a loop that had waited for someone to stand in the one place doors forget. For every figure that passed, the fire dimmed a degree but never dangerously. It was careful with itself, with the building, with the story. Stubborn ones came, shapes that clutched at the pews, habits with no bodies. For them, Clay said the names he knew from the placards out front, the grim list of men with short lives and one cause. I said the names no placard carries: wife, daughter, stranger. You don't need the right names at a threshold. You need the right intention. The air learned, the fire granted, the procession thinned. The last to come was small, not child, small in the way of a moment, not a person. The residue of a decision, an apology nobody took, a hand not held. It hovered at the aisle, a trouble that didn't believe it deserved to pass. For it, the bell rang again, once, then once more, off-tempo like a laugh at a funeral. Clay's arm trembled against mine. We kept our palms up the way you keep them up for a friend who has not taken your help for years, and finally decides to try. The smallness stretched, considered, threaded the ring. When it went, the flame inside the church quieted to a glow the color of bread, the kind of heat that means people might sit and be together. At 12:43 it was done. The church stood as it had at 11:59. Gray boards, black door, windows dark, no smoke, no scorch, nothing left in the air but the mineral smell of heat imagined. The bell that isn't there made the smallest after sound, the way your ear rings when you leave a concert. Clay leaned his forehead against the exterior wall, like a man who has been granted a private reprieve at a lottery he didn't enter. We laughed like men who need to borrow laughter's shape to hold back the next thing. We locked what could be locked, which felt farcical and necessary. On the way to the truck, we turned once, the way you do when you leave the dead and want to be certain of your own feet. Dawn took the place like a reheard song. The camera housings we'd tightened recorded nothing but shadow and our headlamps. The solar rigs had pulled exactly the expected power. The checklist would read fine. The owners would smile the way people smile when folklore sells tickets. We could have left the night where it belonged, in that private ledger places keep, separate from receipts. But 2 days later, the owner called to say the church hadn't burned at midnight for the first time since they'd bought the site. A tour group had been disappointed. They'd paid for fireworks in a world that can't guarantee you a show. He asked if we'd done anything that might have interfered with the presentation. Clay said, "We opened a door," and the man laughed like someone had said a line they'd paid a writer to punch up, and told us not to touch any historic structures without permission. For a week, nothing burned. On the 8th night, a different building went, one of the shacks by the tailings, a place where someone had kept their boots and their bottle and their superstition, and the fire ran its loop there, bright and courteous, and the air let the shapes pass, not because we were there, but because thresholds, once taught, remember. Maybe that's the only mercy places owe us. Learn once, keep learning. We still go out monthly to tighten bolts the wind loosens, to lock what curiosity opens. We don't guarantee shows. We do bring water and a quiet we practice on the drive. When the bell rings where no bell is, we stop pretending we're not the kind of men who answer. If you go during the day when the boards are only wood and the sun makes liars of shadows. Don't take pieces home. Don't call it haunted like you're asking for a trick. If someone tells you the church burns at midnight and stands perfect by morning, believe them, and also believe that not every fire wants to eat. Some want to count. Some want to be counted. And if you find yourself at a door that won't let something through, raise your hand and mean it. The desert has its own paperwork, but it still respects a signature. The first voice came through the static at Orontu 11, a breath pinched into vowels by distance, and the ranger on night watch at the Mogollon Rim station leaned in because all rangers lean in when the forest whispers names. The rim has its own way of speaking, wind threading pines like organ pipes, elk making fog out of moonlight, the brittle click of cold rock. And the radio's hiss usually lays over it like gauze. This wasn't that. It was a shape almost like a person, the smallest pressure that organizes noise into intention, a voice that said, "I'm lost," in a tone you only use once. The logbook had a column for time, a column for location, and a wide blank that might as well have been labeled Mercy. The ranger wrote, O211, you Ned, female, sounds like the upper draw, no open call on Channel 2, and stood up because sitting while someone learns how to be afraid feels like a sin the rim will remember. There are rules for the night shift. You don't triangulate ghosts. You don't call out into the dark unless you're ready to have the dark answer. You keep your voice low like a father in a doorway. The rim is a long cliff where the Colorado Plateau slices itself open and shows 200 miles of bones. It's a place that makes even trucks feel humble, and it favors attention over muscle. The ranger keyed the mic and said, "Say again," in the smallest possible syllables, unthreatening as a cupped hand. The voice came clearer, not because the radio found a tower, but because the air found a shape. "I'm almost there." In the speaker's breath was the sound of pine needles underfoot, and faintly, the heavy inhale of the forest at altitude, and behind that, something like a clock without hands. The map on the wall showed a scatter of campsites like freckles. None of them were checked in for a hiker who sounded like this. Between 0212 and 0220, the station learned a new kind of time, measured not in minutes, but in distances between words. The voice spoke the way a person walks a narrow ledge, pause, place, test. I can see the drop. The ranger pictured the rim's edge under starlight, the way the earth stops, the way a sentence stops when someone decides to stop speaking. Don't move, the ranger said, which is a cruel sentence to hand a stranger you cannot reach. Tell me what you see. There is safety in inventory, the voice said. The dark. The little lights. A road like a ribbon. A noise like breathing. The ranger looked through the station window into a sky so honest you can find your own pulse in it, and saw the lights of Payson making their polite glow on the low side, and thought of how much breathing the rim does when the temperature drops and the rocks give back their day. A second voice arrived at 0221, male, low, speaking almost in the first voice's rhythm, as if practicing on a piano missing 3 keys. Don't look down, it said, and the ranger said, copy, because acknowledging is a spell and a habit. The ranger asked for names, and the radio gave none. Names belonged to day and paperwork. This felt like dusk learning to wear a uniform. On the wall, a paper pinned under tape-listed cross trails, service roads, water points the public still believes in. On the desk, a stack of reports from the summer. Ankles, bees, found dogs, found children who weren't lost men who weren't found. In the drawer, a coffee-stained sheet from a winter 5 years back, with a note circled twice that read, 2 a.m. chatter, sounds like last words, origin unknown. The older rangers called it the choir, and made the sign of whatever they believed without moving their hands. At 0224, a fragment cut through like a clean edge. Tell my mom. And then, static filled the part of the sentence where America keeps the things it can't finish. The ranger didn't write that one down. Some lines belong in the air, or not at all. Instead, the ranger said, I'm here. Because sometimes the only true information is presence, even over a mile of timber, and drop. The radio obliged with a smaller, steadier breath, as if the person on the other end had pressed their mouth closer and made the circle between living things infinitesimally tighter. The ranger put a finger on the map, where the rim road kisses the viewpoint that isn't on the brochure, thought of the shortcut down the service grade, and told the duty desk on Channel 2 they were stepping out. The desk replied with the language of paperwork, careful and dense. The ranger signed the log with a time that looked like an apology. The rim at night is a lesson in scales. Big sky, small light. Big drop, small foot. The ranger's truck cut a rectangle in the dark that showed exactly enough and no more. Ponderosa needles gave off that vanilla smell they keep for people who pay attention. Somewhere to the north, a dog barked in a way that means it knows a deer is a person and a person is a deer. The radio, seat-belted into the ranger's chest like a child, kept breathing. I have my light, the voice said. I have water. Good. The ranger said, good. I have your voice. The ranger did not write that down either. They said, keep talking, as if sound were a rope you can pay out between 2 mouths above a cliff. At the pullout, the air made a hard honesty of the cold. The drop was a black that felt full. The ranger killed the headlights and the stars came down, not metaphor. The kind of high country visibility that makes even men who don't brag. Down in the trees, the wind practiced a kind of grammar on the crowns. The radio said, I can see you. And the ranger said back, I don't have my light on. The voice laughed once, a single coin against a bar. I can still see you. In the ranger's chest, something old and unhelpful moved. The prey animal that Americans have gotten good at pretending is extinct. Where are you? The ranger asked, and the answer came shaped like mercy and wrongness. Here. The voice was closer then, not over the radio but at the ear, the way air sometimes speaks in a hallway when two rooms disagree. "Almost there," it said again, and the ranger took one step toward the edge without meaning to. "The rim at night wants you to audit your choices." The ranger stopped and put boots wide, and in their periphery saw the faintest bob of a headlamp far below, a human firefly moving obligingly where no trail belongs. "Flash your light," the ranger said into the mic, and down there the firefly flashed, a code no human teaches. 2 long, 1 short, a child's idea of SOS. The ranger said, "Okay, stay put, I'm dropping a marker." They tossed a chem light into the dark and watched it arc like a small comet and settle, a star on the lip of the drop. On the radio, the breathing steadied when the green glow found a place to be. They dropped a second, then a third, stepping along the edge with a careful litany in their mouth the way people talk to horses. The rim received each tiny sun with indifference. "I'm not alone," the voice said, and the ranger's skin remembered every shift they'd ever worked. "Who's with you?" "You," the voice said, not coy. Behind it, the radio picked up a new tone, the faint nested sound of other radios, the way scanners sound when someone in the next room is on the same channel. Fragments bloomed and died. "His dad. Still can see the highway. It's fine, don't look." It wasn't a chorus, not yet. It was a warm-up, voices lifting vowels as if the forest had decided that tonight, finally, it would all be spoken at once. At 9:02:37, the world pinched. The ranger knows this feeling. Storms do it, fire does it, sudden grief does it. The air became a sleeve, and the rim's edge felt like a hinge. The distant headlamp flickered and went steady, then multiplied, then merged into one again, parallax and tricks and something else. The radio gave up on sentences and offered the simple, terrible nouns. Mom, sorry, water, road, name. The ranger said, "Stop," to the night itself, and it did not. The ranger stepped back, and the green chem light looked small enough to pick up and put in a pocket where something rough might wear a hole, and a man might bleed a bit and keep walking. "Listen," the ranger said, not to the voice, but to whatever organizes mistakes. "We have you. That is a lie and a promise." The radio softened, the way cloth softens at the elbow where you bend it long enough. From somewhere down in the black, the firefly lifted, moved 3 feet left, stopped. "Good," the ranger said, like training a dog to avoid a snake. Again. It moved right. Above, a satellite cut a fast, dumb line across a sky that does not care. In the speaker, he says, "I have to keep talking." The ranger said, "All right. It is a thing you can give, for a while at least." They told the voice a story about the first time they came up here as a kid and ate peanut butter on a rock, and the world was a room and the rim the window. They told the voice about the elk that stand on the edge like kings. They told it about the way snow takes this country and gives it back kinder in April. The radio said, "I can see the snow." At 02:49, the duty desk called with the slow iron of procedure. 2 units rolling. Pager on. Helicopter unavailable. The ranger said, "Copy," and meant hurry. Down in the timber, the headlamp found a rhythm that looked like survival and suddenly broke it. A misstep is a prayer's end. The radio carried a sound the ranger will always hear with their teeth. The short foot slip, the bark of boot rubber, the reflexive curse, the empty beat where gravity decides which part of you it wants. "I'm," the voice said, and the rest was the clean, beautiful tone of nothing, the way silence returns a room to itself after a music has finished. The ranger counted 1, 2, 3, the number you give people to get their breath back, and at 4, the voice returned, but newer, thinner, a copy of a copy saying, with delight and apology, "I'm okay." And for a second, the station, the truck, the rim, the map, the law, the years, all agreed to lie together. Rescuers found a man near dawn, not far below the service grade cut. sitting on a ledge with knees to chest, headlamp out, eyes wide in a way that would take a month to teach to close again. He said someone had talked him sideways, along a piece of nothing until a ledge took pity. He said he'd kept his eyes on a little green star because a voice wanted him to. He said he'd been alone. He said he'd heard a crowd. Back at the station, the logbook took the times, and the paces, and the names that go on forms. The ranger added nothing about the way the radio goes quiet afterward, like a throat that has said a eulogy well. In the weeks that followed, the night shift learned what the older sheet meant by choir. Some nights the static carries one voice long enough to save it. Some nights it carries three that don't know who they're talking to. Once, at 2:11 again, the radio said the ranger's name in a tone only one person ever used, and the ranger stood very still and said to the empty dispatch room, "Not today." And the room respected the sentence. It helps to do the job like the forest is listening because it is, whether or not you need it to be. It helps to remember that when a place learns how to keep last words, it takes as many as you'll give it and gives back sometimes, just enough to keep you gentle. If the rim keeps a ledger, it doesn't show it. It shows rock and tree and sky and road and the miracle of a drop that makes people feel more honest. The radio rests on its charger and dreams in a language of weather. The map waits for another pin. The logbook leaves space wide as mercy, and most nights you can go stand at the edge and hear nothing but wind and your own small life stretching itself into the cold and returning whole. If this story gripped you, join Verified Souls for more chilling Arizona campfire tales. And hit subscribe so you never miss the next night on the rim.